Hello, my sweet friends. This is Mrs. Gomez, and today we'll be reading The Wild Robot for Text, chapters 16 through 20. Chapter 16, The Plunge. Mrs. Beaver's angry voice was echoing across the pond. He was always grumbling about something or other, but this time he sounded unusually upset. Roz marched over to see what all the fuss was about, and as she went, she began to hear squeaking and splashing, and through the foliage she caught glimpses of otters leaping off the beaver dam and into the water. Roz stepped out from the trees and onto the dam. It was a low wall of branches and rocks and mud that stretched along one side of the pond. She had crossed it hundreds of times without any difficulty. But the pond had recently been dredged to hold more water, and now it was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. The robot had fallen into deep water once, and it had nearly destroyed her. So she didn't hurry, but carefully made her way across the dam toward the commotion. "Come back here so I can scold you," hollered Mr. Beaver as he swam after the otters. The otters ignored him. They kept climbing onto the dam and splashing into the water, happily squeaking all the while. Mr. Beaver's son, Paddler, was floating nearby, and he couldn't help giggling. "Don't encourage them, son," said Mr. Beaver. "These creatures are a menace." Paddler frowned and said, "After what they've been through, it's nice to see them having fun." "The otters can have all the fun they want, just not in my pond." "Dad, I know you made this pond, but that doesn't mean it belongs to you." "That is precisely what it means." When the otters took a break from playing, Shelley swam up to the beavers and said, "I'm sorry if we're disturbing you. We know we're out of place here. We're sea otters. We should be in the sea. But we have to find a new home somewhere on the island, and we like it here." Mr. Beaver grunted. "I don't understand why you have to live in my pond when there are so many new ponds to choose from." "Those new ponds are just holes filled with water," said Shelley. "This pond has plants and fish and geese and insects and beavers. This pond is full of life. It feels more like a home." Mrs. Beaver's head poked up from the surface. She glared at her husband and said, "Remember how you asked me to point out when you're being stubborn and rude? Well, you're being stubborn and rude." Then she smiled at the otters and said, "You are very welcome to live here. This pond is big enough for all of us." And with that, Mrs. Beaver disappeared back below the surface. Reader, the next few events happened very quickly. First, the otters resumed playing. They burst into action, squeaking and splashing and climbing onto the dam. This made Paddler giggle, but his father was not amused. In one swift motion, Mr. Beaver smacked his broad tail against the water. That was his way of warning the otters to keep their distance. However, he ended up startling Roz, who had been quietly approaching this whole time. She stumbled and wobbled and swung her arms to keep her balance. Then she toppled off the dam and into the pond. Kerploosh! The robot sank like a stone and vanished into the murky depths. Around the pond, animals turned and stared. Worried faces peered out from the trees. Glimmer and Brightbill came flying. "My mother can't survive in deep water," squawked Brightbill. "Somebody do something," screeched Glimmer. The beavers and otters were about to dive down when they saw a shape rising from the bottom. A moment later, Roz hauled herself out of the water and onto the dam. She was covered in muck, which started oozing down her smooth sides. A fish wiggled out from a muddy clump on her head and plopped back into the pond. "Are you okay, Ma?" said Brightbill. "What do you need?" said Shelley. "Speak to us," said Mr. Beaver. "Thank you for your concern," said Roz, "but I seem to be perfectly fine." Chapter 17, The Robotic Body. A crowd of creatures crammed into the robot's garden and listened as she described her plunge. Down I went, tumbling end over end, sinking into the beaver pond, Roz began. I grasped at the muddy ground, but the sides were steep and slippery, and I just kept sinking. I could not believe how deep it was. The otters and moose and turtles really did a terrific job of dredging the pond. As I continued sinking, I expected my survival instincts to warn me of danger, and for water to seep into my body, and for everything to go dark. Instead, I came to a stop in the soft muck at the bottom. Dirt and leaves settled around me, and then I felt something squirm against my legs. It was a frog. She crawled out from under me, croaked a few angry words, and swam off. I noticed how the frog kicked her legs to move through the water. Mimicking the frog, I stood and kicked my legs, and suddenly I was swimming to the surface. I'm confused, said Brightbill. I didn't think you could survive in deep water. That was true of my original body, Roz explained. Back then I was afraid of deep water, and so I tried to avoid it. I kept trying to avoid it even after my mind was transferred from that old body to this new one. I am now tougher and stronger and faster than before. And I have just learned that I'm also waterproof. The animals quietly thought about Roz. They would never understand how her mind had passed from one body to another, or why there was so much she didn't know about herself. But all that really mattered was that their friend was alive and well. Chapter 18, The Experiment. Midnight, and most of the animals were asleep. Brightbill, however, was wide awake. He couldn't stop thinking about his mother. Throughout his life, deep water had always been a danger to her. He remembered when he was a gosling, how she could only watch from the edge of the pond while he went swimming. He remembered worrying any time she crossed the river. He remembered her falling into the ocean and how it almost killed her. Those experiences had happened with her old robotic body, but now she had a different body, and only hours earlier he had learned that his mother was waterproof. Never again would he have to worry about her falling into water. The goose wondered what other hidden abilities his mother might have, and an idea popped into his head. The poison tide was harmful to all living things, but Roz was not a living thing. She was a machine. What if she was safe from the poison tide? Brightbill needed to speak to her right away. Without waking Glimmer, he carefully crept out of their nest. Then he stepped through the moonlit forest towards Roz's home, but she wasn't there. Brightbill knew his mother well, and he had a good guess where to find her. The goose took flight and headed north. He flew out from the forest and over the mountain, and there was the ocean spread out beneath the stars. The slopes along the coast had once been carpeted with grasses and flowers, but now they were a wasteland. Poisonous sea spray had killed off the plants, and the wildfire had turned them to ashes. On this night there was no sea spray, no breeze, no crashing waves. Everything was calm, and then Brightbill spotted his mother. She was standing in a quiet rocky cove staring into the water. "Ma, what are you doing?" cried Brightbill as he circled through the night sky. Roz's headlights swung up and found her son. "Go home, Brightbill," she said. "You're not safe near the poison tide." "What about you, Ma? Are you safe?" "I do not know," said Roz. "I have come here to learn whether I can survive the poison tide. To do that, I must go into the water. There is a risk that the poison tide will damage my body, but I believe it is worth that risk. I did not want anyone to worry about me, so I kept this experiment a secret. I should have known you would uncover my plan." "I've been having the same thoughts," said Brightbill. "That's why I went looking for you. When I didn't find you at home, I knew I'd find you here where the poison tide first came ashore. Do you understand why I must do this? I understand. I'm not here to stop you, but I won't let you do this alone. The robot's eyes glowed brighter. Thank you, son. I am glad you're here. But no matter what happens to me, you must not go near the poison tide. Bright-Bill nodded and watched as his mother turned back to the cove. She lifted a foot off the ground and extended it over the shallows. Then she lowered it into the gently shivering water. Roz stood there, perfectly still, one foot on the rocks, the other in the poison tide. What's happening? Said Bright-Bill. Does it hurt? It does not hurt, said Roz. The poison tide has no effect on my foot. I will go in further. Roz lowered her other foot, stepping down to a deeper part of the shallows, and the water came up to her knees. She stepped down again, and the water came up to her waist. Then it came up to her chest, then to her shoulders. She kept stepping down, and more of her body disappeared into the poison tide until she was completely submerged. The robot was just a blur within the poison tide. Her headlights lit up the water, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding rocks. It was a frightening scene, and the goose felt a flicker of panic. Why was his mother still underwater? Had something gone wrong? Did she need help? At last, Bright-Bill saw movement. Roz's headlights swept through the poison tide, and she stepped out from the water and onto the rocks. Well, said Bright-Bill, are you all right? Yes, I am all right, said Roz. The poison tide has no effect on me. Oh, the relief they both felt. The goose cheered, and the robot did a happy dance. But when Bright-Bill swooped down to give his mother a hug, she jumped back and said, Do not touch me! I am still coated with the poison tide. We could both use a hug right now, but I must first rinse myself in fresh water. Please, son, go home to Glimmer and get some rest. I will see you both tomorrow. Bright-Bill nodded and soared away, and soon Roz was alone. The robot wanted to rinse the poison tide from her body, but she didn't want to poison any plants or animals on the island. So she waited on the rocky shore for rain. She stood there for most of the night, and eventually a few rain clouds drifted over. Once it started drizzling, Roz carefully washed herself from head to toe, and by the time the clouds passed, every speck of poison tide had rinsed off her body and trickled into the ocean. Chapter 19, The Decision. Rays of sunlight streaked across the pond. The surface rippled, and the robot's head poked up. She had spent the last hour practicing different swimming techniques, and now she was treading water. The forest rustled, and then Bright-Bill and Glimmer flew out from the trees. They glided over to the robot and splashed down beside her. Hello, Roz, said Glimmer. I heard about your experiment last night. Weren't you afraid to touch the poison tide? In a way I was afraid, said Roz. My survival instincts warned me to stay clear of the poison tide, but I ignored the warnings and stepped in anyway. I was ready to jump out at the first sign of trouble, but then I felt a click in my head, and my survival instincts went silent. My sensors had determined that I was safe from the poison tide. So I went in deeper and deeper until I was completely underwater, and I was fine. Up close, I saw that the poison tide is made of tiny particles like a fine dust, and there is so much dust that it forms clouds in the ocean. I do not know what is causing the dust clouds, but I intend to find out. How will you do that? Said Bright Bill. I now know that I am safe in the poison tide, said Roz. And I am also safe in deep water. That means I can safely leave the island. I have decided to travel north to track down the ancient shark. With her help, I will find a way to stop the poison tide. My mission will be dangerous, and I might fail, but that is a chance I must take. You shouldn't go by yourself, said Bright Bill. I could go with you. We've traveled together before. We could do it again. Glimmer looked at her mate and said, No, Bright Bill. You're needed here at home. Glimmer is right, said Roz. The island needs you now more than ever. Bright Bill shook his tail feathers and pond water sprayed behind him. So while you're wandering through the ocean, we're supposed to wait around and hope you solve all of our problems? What if you get hurt? What if you never come back? Bright Bill's emotions swung wildly from fear to anger to pride in his mother's courage. Overwhelmed by his feelings, he dunked his head in the water to cool off, and when he lifted it back up, he felt a little better. I know I have to let you go, Ma, said Bright Bill. I know you're the island's only hope. We believe in you, Roz, said Glimmer. You're doing the right thing. Thank you both for understanding, said Roz. I will leave in the morning. Chapter 20, The Goodbye. For months, Roz had feared the poison tide, and now she was going to march straight into it. She stood on the northern slopes and gazed out at the ocean. Clouds of gentle, shimmering dust were billowing through the water. The robot's eyes drifted skyward to a winged shape high above. Bright Bill was up there scanning the seas. After a few minutes, he dove down and landed on his mother's shoulder. The poison tide gradually curves west, said Bright Bill, pointing. So if you keep moving north, the water will eventually clear up. Thank you for that helpful information, said Roz. And the currents are strong and unpredictable, said Bright Bill, so be careful not to get turned around. My internal compass will keep me headed in the right direction, said Roz. Also, you never know when a boat or an airship might appear, said Bright Bill, so stay underwater as much as you can to be safe. Bright Bill, I appreciate your concern, said Roz, but please try not to worry. I am prepared for whatever I encounter. Farther up the hillside, a group of animals had gathered. They came to see off their good friend Roz. Everybody was counting on her to stop the poison tide. It seemed like an impossible task, but if anyone could succeed, it was the wild robot. Among the group were Loudwing, Nettle, and Thorn, the beavers, and the otters. Chit-Chat stood with her 3 kits. Swooper floated on the breeze. Even Fink was there, lurking behind the others. However, someone important was missing. Where is Glimmer, said Roz. Glimmer wanted to be here, said Bright Bill, but she stayed home because, well, Ma, you're going to be a grandmother. Has Glimmer laid eggs? The goose smiled. She had her first egg early this morning. We expect 4 or 5 more. Oh, Bright Bill, that is wonderful, said Roz, hugging her son. You and Glimmer will be excellent parents. Life has been so hard lately, said Bright Bill. It's nice to have good news, but it feels strange to bring goslings into such a scary world. The world can't be scary sometimes, said Roz. Whenever I am scared, I think of you, and I feel strong. Now, with grand goslings on the way, I feel even stronger. I will do everything in my power to stop the poison tide. I am not afraid. Just be careful, said Bright Bill. I want my goslings to meet their grandmother." "I will be careful," said Roz. "I want to meet my grand goslings." Roz and Brightville hugged each other tight, and then Brightville fluttered up and joined the other animals. The robot marched downhill and across the shore. Before stepping into the water, she peered back at her friends and family. They looked tired, frail, nervous. Surrounding them were dead plants and scorched rocks. A puff of wind sent ashes floating through the group. The island had always seemed like a paradise, but now it seemed more like a prison. Voices called from the hillside. "Good luck, Roz." "Thank you, Roz." "We love you, Roz." Roz waved goodbye. She took in one last view of the island, and when she was ready, she turned and marched into the waves. And that is the end of our chapters for today. I hope you enjoyed them, and I will see you next time.